As darkness fell over Pine Ridge Valley, a bloodied woman in torn hiking gear collapsed on Daniel Reeves's doorstep, begging for help. By morning, his struggling homestead would be transformed into the epicenter of a corporate revolution, with helicopters circling overhead and villagers gathering in disbelief, all because one farmer chose compassion over suspicion on a stormy night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last light of day faded behind the jagged mountain peaks, painting the weathered barn in shades of burnt amber. Daniel Reeves stood at the edge of his property, calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of herbal tea, watching the gathering storm clouds with a practiced eye. Mountain weather was fickle this time of year, gentle one moment, merciless the next. He could smell the coming rain, feel the electricity in the air that promised thunder. Another dry season ending too late, he muttered to himself, taking a long sip from his chipped ceramic mug. The tea was bitter, wild herbs gathered from the mountainside, a poor substitute for the store-bought kind he could no longer afford. Like everything else in Pine Ridge Valley, luxuries had become distant memories. Behind him, the two-story farmhouse that had sheltered 4 generations of Reeves farmers stood resolute against the darkening sky. Its cedar siding, once rich and golden, had faded to a weathered gray that matched the mood of the valley. Solar panels, installed in more optimistic times, clung to the southern roof slope, their capacity diminished by years of harsh mountain winters and no money for maintenance. The distant rumble of thunder prompted Daniel to turn back toward the house. At 42, his tall frame carried the toughness of a man who'd spent his life working the land, but recent years had etched new lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark brown hair. The mounting challenges facing Pine Ridge Valley weighed on him more heavily than any physical labor ever could. Inside, the farmhouse was warm but sparse. Daniel had sold most of the family heirlooms years ago, first the antiques his mother had cherished, then his father's collection of handcrafted furniture. What remained were the essentials: a worn leather armchair by the stone fireplace, sturdy oak dining table with mismatched chairs, and shelves lined with preserved foods from his greenhouse and orchards. The kitchen wall calendar caught his eye as he rinsed his mug. 3 days circled in urgent red ink, the town council meeting where they would vote on Mountain Vista Corporation's proposal. 3 days that would determine whether Pine Ridge Valley retained its independence or became another corporate acquisition. Daniel's gaze drifted to the stack of papers on his counter, the Mountain Vista logo emblazoned across each page. The community development proposal promised economic revitalization, jobs, and infrastructure investments. What it failed to highlight was the fine print: water rights transfers, zoning changes, and the effective end of the valley's agricultural heritage. As community council president, Daniel had been fighting the proposal for months, rallying the remaining 37 families of Pine Ridge to resist Mountain Vista's pressure tactics. But the corporation's promises grew more enticing as the valley's situation worsened. Last month, the Miller family had sold their century-old homestead. Before them, the Jacobsons and the Parkers had given in. Each departure weakened the community's resolve. The old radio on his counter crackled with the evening weather report, the forecaster's voice cutting through intermittent static. Severe thunderstorm warning for the eastern mountain region. Flash flooding possible in low-lying areas. Residents are advised to secure loose items and avoid unnecessary travel. Daniel adjusted the antenna, trying to improve the poor reception. The internet connection, unreliable at the best of times, had failed completely 2 days ago. The radio and his satellite phone were his only links to the outside world during storms. He moved to the window, watching as the first heavy drops of rain struck the glass. His greenhouse, a patchwork structure of reclaimed windows and carefully maintained irrigation systems, stood vulnerable at the edge of his vegetable garden. In better times, it had produced enough organic crops to supply 3 farmers' markets in neighboring towns. Now it barely sustained his own needs and those of the community barter system that had emerged as cash grew scarce in Pine Ridge. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal roof. Daniel stoked the fireplace, adding a split log from the diminishing woodpile. Electricity was expensive, and the solar system struggled on stormy days. Wood heat was reliable, a constant in a world of increasing uncertainty. His dinner was simple: root vegetable stew simmering in a cast-iron pot suspended over the coals, homemade bread that was more dense than his mother's recipe had once produced, the result of using heritage grain he grew himself rather than store-bought flour. The meal represented both the hardship and resilience of mountain living. As he stirred the stew, Daniel's thoughts turned to tomorrow's challenges. The eastern irrigation channel needed repairs before the heavy autumn rains washed away more of the mountainside. The community greenhouse had developing issues with its heating system. 3 families needed help harvesting their remaining crops before the first frost. Problems multiplied while resources dwindled. Lightning flashed, momentarily bathing the kitchen in harsh white light. The subsequent thunder shook the windows in their frames. Daniel added another log to the fire and settled into his father's armchair with a worn leather journal. By firelight, he reviewed his notes for the upcoming council meeting: arguments against Mountain Vista's proposal, alternative sustainability plans for the valley, financial projections that grew more desperate with each revision. The company's latest community impact assessment claimed their development would bring 200 jobs to the region. What they didn't mention was that those jobs would primarily go to imported specialists, while local farmers would be reduced to groundskeepers and service staff in the planned resort complex. The proposed water usage alone would devastate the valley's agricultural capacity, redirecting the mountain springs that had nourished these farms for generations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rain lashed against the windows as the storm intensified. Another flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the fireplace glow. Daniel sighed, setting down his pen. Power outages were common during mountain storms. The valley's electrical infrastructure had been neglected for decades. He was reaching for the emergency lantern when a sound cut through the storm's rage, a pounding at his front door, desperate and uneven. Daniel froze, listening. Few people ventured up the mountain road even in good weather. During a storm like this, it was almost unheard of. The pounding came again, weaker this time. Daniel grabbed the lantern and moved cautiously to the entryway. Living alone on an isolated mountain farm had taught him caution, but the desperation in those knocks overrode his wariness. "Who's there?" he called, approaching the heavy oak door. No answer came, only another feeble knock. Daniel unlatched. the old deadbolt and pulled the door open against the force of the wind. Rain immediately gusted into the entryway, soaking the worn runner rug. In the lantern's glow stood a woman, or rather she leaned precariously against the doorframe, barely standing. Her expensive hiking gear was torn and muddied, her face pale beneath smears of dirt and what looked alarmingly like blood. A nasty gash ran along her temple, and she clutched her left arm at an unnatural angle. "Please," she managed, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Help!" Her knees buckled. Daniel moved instinctively, catching her before she hit the floorboards. She was light in his arms, but trembling violently from cold, pain, or both. Without hesitation, he carried her inside, kicking the door closed behind them. "I've got you," he said, moving toward the fireplace. "You're safe now." In the firelight, her injuries looked worse. The gash on her temple still seeped blood, and her hiking clothes were soaked through. Her breathing was shallow and quick, signs of shock that Daniel recognized from his wilderness first aid training. He gently laid her on the couch near the fire, quickly gathering blankets from the nearby chest. The woman's eyes fluttered open as he covered her, revealing a startling blue-gray color that reminded him of the mountain lake after a storm. "Where?" she began, trying to orient herself. "Pine Ridge Valley," Daniel answered, already moving to retrieve his first aid kit from under the kitchen sink. "My farm is about 8 miles up the eastern slope. What happened to you? The hiking trails are nowhere near here." "Got lost," she managed, wincing as she tried to sit up. "Storm came so suddenly. Fell down a ravine. Walked for hours." "Don't try to move," Daniel instructed, returning with supplies and a mug of hot water. "That arm might be broken and you've lost blood." He worked methodically, cleaning the head wound first. It was deep, but not as serious as it had initially appeared. Scalp wounds always bled dramatically. Her arm concerned him more. The swelling and discoloration suggested a fracture. "I need to splint this," he explained, preparing supplies from his first aid kit. "It's going to hurt. What's your name?" "Alexandra," she replied, gritting her teeth against the pain. "Alexandra Winters." The name triggered something in Daniel's memory, but he couldn't place it as he focused on treating her injuries. "I'm Daniel Reeves. In better circumstances, I'd say welcome to Pine Ridge." A ghost of a smile crossed her pale lips. "Your bedside manner is better than some doctors I've met." Daniel fashioned a splint from supplies in his kit, working as gently as possible. "Farming teaches you to make do. We're pretty far from emergency services up here." Alexandra winced as he secured the splint, but remained remarkably composed. Up close, Daniel noticed details he'd missed in the initial emergency. Her hiking gear, though torn and muddied, was top-of-the-line equipment. The watch on her uninjured wrist was a high-end model designed for serious mountaineering. This was no casual day hiker who'd wandered off a trail. "You're a long way from the marked paths," Daniel observed, offering her a mug of hot tea infused with wild honey. "The nearest public trail is nearly 15 miles west of here." Alexandra accepted, the tea awkwardly with her good hand. "I was exploring, wanted to see the eastern ridge." She paused, studying him. "You seem very calm about finding a half-dead stranger on your doorstep." "Mountain living," Daniel said simply, stoking the fire. "We help when help's needed. Questions come later." The storm continued its assault outside, wind howling through the eaves. Daniel added another log to the fire, then retrieved a pot of stew from the hook above the coals. "You should eat something," he said, ladling the thick liquid into a bowl. "It'll help with the shock." Alexandra studied the farmhouse interior as he prepared the food, her gaze lingering on the faded photographs on the mantel, the worn furniture, the carefully maintained but obviously aged equipment in the kitchen. "You live here alone?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Daniel nodded, handing her the bowl and a spoon. "4 generations of Reeves have worked this land. I'm the last one left." "It's beautiful," she said quietly, surprising him. Most outsiders saw only the hardship of mountain living, not the beauty. Peaceful, even with the storm. "It has its moments," Daniel agreed, settling into his chair. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, questions began forming in his mind. Alexandra's expensive gear, her presence so far from marked trails, the calculated way she observed his home. Something didn't add up. "What brings you to our valley?" he asked casually. "We don't get many hikers this late in the season, especially not on the eastern slopes." Alexandra hesitated, sipping her tea before answering. "I wanted to see the mountains before winter set in. My guide recommended this area for its unspoiled views." "Your guide abandoned you in a storm?" Daniel's tone made it clear what he thought of such a guide. "No, she faltered. "I wanted to explore on my own. Probably not my wisest decision." Daniel's satellite phone chirped from the kitchen counter, a message coming through despite the storm. He excused himself to check it, finding a text from Eliza Chen, the town's doctor and his closest friend. "Road washed out at Falcon's Bend. No access to Eastern Valley until tomorrow at earliest. Everyone okay up there?" He typed a quick reply. "All fine. Have injured hiker. Will assess in morning," before returning to the fireplace. Alexandra had set aside her half-eaten stew and was examining a framed map of Pine Ridge Valley on the wall, her interest seemingly genuine. "This is quite detailed," she observed. "Historical?" Daniel nodded. "My grandfather drew it in the 1950s, before the Western Dam was built. The valley's changed since then, but the essential geography remains. These markings," she pointed, to blue lines that webbed across the landscape, water systems, natural springs, irrigation channels, underground streams. Daniel stepped closer to the map. "Pine Ridge has one of the most unique water tables in the region. 7 natural springs feed the valley, creating a self-contained ecosystem." Alexandra's expression changed subtly, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or calculation. "Valuable resource. Life itself up here," Daniel agreed. "Without our water system, these farms wouldn't exist." Another text chirped through. Eliza again. "Mountain Vista reps arrived in town today. Emergency council meeting called for tomorrow instead of Friday. Thomas pushing for early vote." Daniel's expression hardened as he read the message. Thomas Bryant had been mayor for 6 years and had gradually shifted from community advocate to corporate sympathizer as Mountain Vista's offers grew more generous. The moved-up vote was a tactical play designed to catch opposition off guard. "Bad news?" Alexandra asked, noting his changed demeanor. Daniel hesitated, uncertain how much to share with a stranger. "Local politics. Nothing that can't wait until morning." Alexandra seemed about to press further when a violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making her start. The movement caused her to wince in pain, reminding them both of her injuries. "You need rest," Daniel said decisively. "I'll make up the guest room. The doctor can't reach us until the road clears tomorrow, but we've got everything you need here for tonight." While Alexandra settled into the guest room, his sister's old room, preserved almost exactly as she'd left it when she moved to the city 15 years ago, Daniel returned to the kitchen. The storm showed no signs of abating, and his mind was troubled by the coincidence of Alexandra's arrival and Mountain Vista's accelerated timeline. He retrieved a worn photo album from a drawer beneath the bookshelf, flipping through pages of family history. 4 generations of Reeves farmers stared back at him, men and women who had carved a life from this mountainside, who had weathered economic depressions, natural disasters, and personal tragedies without surrendering their independence. A newspaper clipping fell from between the pages, the Pine Ridge Gazette from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Mountain Vista Corporation acquires neighboring Clayton Valley properties." The accompanying photo showed executives in business attire standing before a mountain backdrop, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Daniel had almost returned the clipping to the album when his hand froze. There, third from the left, stood a woman whose face he recognized. Younger, hairstyled differently, dressed in corporate finery rather than torn hiking gear, but unmistakably Alexandra Winters. The caption confirmed it. Mountain Vista CEO Alexandra Winters announces expansion plans. Daniel sat heavily in his chair, the album forgotten in his lap. The woman sleeping in his guest room, the injured hiker he'd rescued from the storm, was the very person orchestrating the takeover of Pine Ridge Valley. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white light, as Daniel contemplated the implications of this discovery. The CEO of Mountain Vista Corporation was under his roof, injured and vulnerable, on the very night before a crucial vote that would determine his community's fate. It couldn't be coincidence, but what was her true purpose in coming here alone? Was this some kind of corporate espionage? An attempt to gather intelligence on the valley's resistance? Or something else entirely? Thunder rolled across the valley as Daniel closed the album, his jaw set with grim determination. By sheltering Alexandra Winters, he had unwittingly invited the architect of his community's potential destruction into his home. The question now was how to turn this unexpected development to Pine Ridge Valley's advantage. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the mountain. Inside, Daniel Reeves prepared for a different kind of storm, one that would determine the future of everything he held dear. Tomorrow, when Alexandra awoke, the real confrontation would begin. As the night deepened, Daniel remained vigilant, checking on his unexpected guest periodically. Alexandra slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring in her sleep fragments about water surveys and development phases that only confirmed his suspicions. Each time he looked in on her, the incongruity struck him anew. This polished corporate executive, now vulnerable and dependent on his care, wielded more power over Pine Ridge's future than anyone alive. In the quiet hours before dawn, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, reviewing Mountain Vista's proposal by lantern light. With new context, the document's carefully worded promises revealed their hollow core. What had been presented as sustainable community development was, in reality, the systematic dismantling of an independent agricultural community to make way for luxury resorts and bottled water facilities. The most troubling section detailed Mountain Vista's plans for the valley's water resources, the lifeblood of Pine Ridge. Alexandra's company intended to redirect 60% of the natural spring flow to support their developments, leaving the remaining farms with regulated access to what had been freely available for generations. As the first grey light of dawn filtered through the windows, Daniel made a decision. Alexandra Winters had come to his mountain, whether by accident or design, and in doing so, had given Pine Ridge Valley something it desperately needed: leverage. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world, glistening with raindrops. The morning sun crested the eastern ridge, painting the valley in gold and throwing long shadows across Daniel's weathered farmhouse. A new day had begun, one that would change everything for Pine Ridge Valley and the woman sleeping under a fourth-generation quilt in the guest bedroom upstairs. Daniel stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist rise from the valley floor. The mountain air was sharp, with pine and wet earth carrying the promise of autumn's approach. Behind him, the farmhouse door creaked open, and Alexandra Winters stepped carefully onto the porch, her injured arm properly splinted, her face pale but composed in the morning light. "Good morning, Miss Winters," Daniel said without turning. "Or should I say CEO Winters of Mountain Vista Corporation?" Alexandra froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her injured arm as if to protect herself. The morning sunlight illuminated her face, revealing a complex mix of emotions: surprise, wariness, and something that might have been respect. "How did you know?" she asked finally, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. Daniel turned, meeting her gaze directly. "Small communities have long memories, Ms. Winters. Your company has been the only topic of conversation in Pine Ridge for months." He gestured to the kitchen. "Coffee? We have much to discuss." She hesitated before nodding, following him inside with cautious steps. The farmhouse kitchen looked different in daylight, its worn surfaces and carefully preserved equipment speaking of resilience rather than poverty. Daniel poured coffee into a chipped but beautifully handcrafted mug and set it before her. "Your photo was in the paper when you acquired Clayton Valley," he explained, sliding the clipping across the table. "Your company has left quite an impression on the region." Alexandra studied the image, her expression unreadable, not all of it accurate, I suspect. "Enlighten me," Daniel replied, leaning against the counter with his own coffee. "What brings the CEO of Mountain Vista to my doorstep? The hiking story seems rather convenient now." Alexandra sipped her coffee, wincing slightly as she shifted her injured arm. The hiking part was true, the getting lost part. She sighed. "Less so. You came here deliberately, to my farm. Why?" "Because you're the holdout Mr. Reeves, the community council president who's been rallying resistance against our development plans." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I wanted to see for myself what we're up against." Daniel's laugh held no humor. "Corporate espionage by the CEO herself. That's dedication. I prefer to call it due diligence." Alexandra set down her mug. "Your counter-proposal to our development plan was unexpected. Most communities we approach are eager for investment." "Most communities you approach are desperate," Daniel corrected. "And desperation makes for poor negotiation. We may be struggling, but Pine Ridge Valley isn't dead yet." The satellite phone on the counter chirped with a message. Daniel checked it, his expression darkening. "The roads are cleared enough for vehicles. Dr. Chen is on her way up to check on you." He looked up at Alexandra. What happens when she recognizes you? Alexandra considered this, turning the coffee mug between her fingers. That depends on you, doesn't it? You could have let me freeze on your porch last night. Instead, you helped me. Why? Because that's what decent people do, Daniel replied simply. The question is, what happens now? The rumble of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, they watched an old jeep navigate the muddy farm road. Eliza Chen, Pine Ridge Valley's only doctor, had arrived. "Your move, Miss Winters," Daniel said quietly. Alexandra straightened, meeting his gaze. "I'd like to propose a truce, 24 hours. Let me recover, and I'll share information about Mountain Vista's plans that you don't have access to. Information that might help your community make an informed decision. And in return, you show me Pine Ridge Valley, the real valley, not the survey reports and development projections. I want to see what we'd be changing." Daniel studied her face, searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. 24 hours, but no lies to Dr. Chen. If she recognizes you, we deal with it honestly. The kitchen door opened before Alexandra could respond. Eliza Chen entered with her medical bag, shaking rain from her jacket. At 45, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had delivered babies, mended broken bones, and comforted the dying in equal measure. "Daniel," she greeted, her observant eyes immediately fixing on Alexandra. "And this must be our injured hiker." "Alexandra Winters," Daniel said, watching both women carefully. "She took a bad fall on the eastern ridge during the storm." Recognition flickered in Eliza's eyes, but her professional demeanor never wavered. "Mountain Vista's CEO. Well, Ms. Winters, you've chosen an interesting time to visit our valley." Alexandra's chin lifted slightly. "Not exactly how I planned to make my entrance. I imagine not." Eliza set her bag on the table. "Let's have a look at those injuries." The examination was thorough and professional. Eliza confirmed what Daniel had suspected. A clean break in the forearm and a concussion, both requiring proper medical attention, but not immediately life-threatening. "You should be in a hospital," Eliza concluded, repacking her supplies. "But, given the circumstances, I'll compromise. The arm needs a proper cast, and you need monitoring for that concussion. I can do both at my clinic in town." "I'd rather stay here," Alexandra said quickly, "if Mr. Reeves is willing." Daniel exchanged a look with Eliza. "We've agreed to a 24-hour truce. Ms. Winters wants to see the valley before the council. We'll vote." Eliza's expression revealed her skepticism. "And you agreed to this?" "Knowledge flows both ways, Eliza. She has information we need." The doctor sighed, turning back to Alexandra. "I'll create a temporary cast here, but I want to see you at my clinic tomorrow morning. Non-negotiable. Head injuries are nothing to trifle with." As Eliza worked, Daniel stepped outside to check his farm after the storm. The eastern greenhouse had survived intact, though several panels would need resealing. The irrigation channels were swollen with rainwater, carrying silt and debris down from the higher slopes. Hours of cleanup work awaited, but for now it would have to wait. When he returned, Eliza was finishing Alexandra's cast, their conversation cutting off abruptly at his entrance. The tension in the room spoke volumes. "Everything all right?" he asked, looking between them. Dr. Chen was explaining the impact Mountain Vista's proposal would have on healthcare in the valley. Alexandra replied, her tone carefully neutral. She has concerns. Concerns is putting it mildly, Eliza retorted, packing away her supplies. Your company's environmental impact statement claims our local clinic would benefit from modernization, but conveniently omits that your plans would eliminate our sliding scale payment system and traditional medicine program. The upgraded facility would offer advanced treatments not currently available, Alexandra countered, to those who could afford them. Eliza closed her medical bag with a decisive snap, which won't include most of our current patients. Daniel intervened before the tension could escalate further. We've agreed to listen first, argue later. Miss Winters wants to see the valley. I'm taking her on a tour once she's feeling up to it. Eliza's expression softened slightly. The Eastern Ridge Road is still washed out, but the main valley route is passable. Just be careful, Daniel. Not all injuries are physical. With a meaningful look at Alexandra, she added, I'll see you tomorrow morning, Miss Winters. 9 a.m. After Eliza departed, an awkward silence filled the kitchen. Alexandra examined her new cast, avoiding Daniel's gaze. Your doctor doesn't pull punches. No one in Pine Ridge has that luxury anymore, Daniel replied, gathering his keys from a hook by the door. If you're serious about seeing the valley, we should get moving. Daylight's valuable this time of year. Alexandra nodded, rising carefully. I'm ready. Daniel's truck was a testament to mountain ingenuity. A 20-year-old pickup maintained. Through mechanical skill and salvaged parts, Alexandra hesitated before climbing in, clearly unaccustomed to such rustic transportation. Not quite the executive transport you're used to, Daniel observed, starting the engine. I grew up riding in worse, she replied unexpectedly, settling in. When Daniel raised an eyebrow, she added, Contrary to what you might think, I wasn't born a CEO. They drove in silence down the muddy mountain road, the truck's tires occasionally slipping on the rain-soaked surface. The storm had transformed the landscape. Streams ran where footpaths had been, and fallen branches littered the roadside. Despite the destruction, there was a raw beauty to the valley after rainfall, everything washed clean and glistening. Where are we going first? Alexandra asked as they approached the valley floor. The heart of what you're proposing to change, Daniel replied, turning onto a narrow side road, the community center. Pine Ridge Valley's community center was a large, barn-like structure nestled among ancient pine trees. Its weather-beaten exterior belied its importance to the valley's social fabric. As Daniel parked, Alexandra noticed the solar arrays on the southern roof and the carefully tended community garden surrounding the building. Inside, the center hummed with activity despite the aftermath of the storm. A dozen people gathered around tables, sorting supplies and coordinating recovery efforts. Maps of the valley were spread across the walls, marked with areas needing attention. Children helped organize emergency supplies, while elders prepared a communal meal in the large kitchen. Conversation stopped when Daniel entered with Alexandra. Eyes widened in recognition, and whispers rippled through the room. An elderly man approached, his weathered face a map of a lifetime spent outdoors. Daniel, what's this about? Everyone, Daniel addressed the room. This is Alexandra Winters, CEO of Mountain Vista Corporation. She had an accident on the mountain during the storm. I'm showing her the valley before the council vote. The silence was deafening. Finally, a woman in her 60s stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, Ms. Corporate America, welcome to what you're planning to bulldoze. I'm Margaret Chen, Eliza's mother, and the community center director." Alexandra met the woman's gaze steadily. "I understand your hostility, Mrs. Chen, but our plans don't include bulldozing anything. No, just repurposing our community land for your eco-resort, redirecting our water for your golf courses, transforming our homes into your service. Staff housing?" Margaret gestured around the room. "This center has been the heart of Pine Ridge for 70 years. Your proposal relegates it to a local heritage museum, a quaint attraction for your tourists." Daniel touched Alexandra's shoulder, guiding her toward a large bulletin board covered with photographs. "This is what you're not seeing in your survey reports," he said quietly. "This is Pine Ridge Valley. The photos told a story decades in the making: community harvests, barn raisings, graduations, weddings, and funerals. Generation after generation of valley residents, their lives intertwined with the land and each other. Recent photos showed climate challenges, community members fighting wildfires, rebuilding after floods, innovating to conserve water during droughts. 7 generations, Margaret said, joining them. That's how long my family has lived in this valley. We've adapted to everything nature and economy have thrown at us. We've evolved our farming practices, built sustainable power systems, created a microeconomy that allows us to survive when markets crash. What your company offers isn't progress, it's erasure." Alexandra studied the photographs, her expression thoughtful. "Your valley's population has declined 40% in the last decade. Young people are leaving. Tax revenue is down. How sustainable is that?" "That's why we need investment," Daniel acknowledged, "but not at the cost of our independence. There's a difference between partnership and takeover." As they continued through the community center, Alexandra observed the valley's ingenuity firsthand. The solar-powered irrigation monitoring system designed by local teenagers. The seed bank preserving heritage varieties adapted to mountain conditions. The barter system board, where residents exchanged goods and services without currency. "This is remarkable," she admitted, examining the water conservation technology. "Our engineers didn't mention any of this in their assessments." "They didn't. Ask," replied a young woman working on a circuit board. "I'm Lily Chen, Eliza's daughter. I designed this system after studying environmental engineering. Came back to the valley when nobody would fund my research." Alexandra looked surprised. "You have a degree in environmental engineering?" "Masters from MIT, Lily confirmed without looking up from her work. "Like many simple mountain folk, I'm extensively educated, just chose to apply my knowledge here rather than in a corporate lab." Daniel noticed Alexandra's expression changing as she interacted with more valley residents. Each conversation challenged her preconceptions, revealing the sophistication beneath Pine Ridge's rustic exterior. After leaving the community center, Daniel drove Alexandra to the valley's agricultural heart. Terraced fields and orchards nestled against the mountainside, irrigated by an ingenious gravity-fed system that maximized the natural water flow. "This method of farming has been refined over generations," Daniel explained, as they walked between rows of apple trees heavy with fruit. "We use 70% less water than conventional orchards while maintaining higher per-acre yields." Alexandra ran her fingers over a ripening apple. "Our agricultural assessment indicated these methods were outdated and inefficient." Your assessment was wrong, Daniel stated flatly. But that's not surprising when you evaluate mountain farming by flatland standards. They continued their tour throughout the afternoon, visiting the community school where children learned conventional subjects alongside practical mountain skills. The renewable energy installation that provided 65% of the valley's electricity needs. The medicinal herb gardens where traditional remedies were cultivated alongside modern pharmacology. At each stop, the pattern repeated. Alexandra's corporate data showed one picture while the reality revealed another. The struggling backward community of Mountain Vistas reports was actually an innovative, resilient society adapting to changing conditions while preserving their core values. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Daniel guided the truck up a steep access road to their final destination, Eagle's Point, a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of Pine Ridge Valley. The autumn light bathed the landscape in golden hues, highlighting the patchwork of farms, forests, and settlements nestled within the mountain's embrace. Daniel cut the engine, allowing silence to envelop them. This is what can't be captured in environmental impact statements or economic projections, he said quietly. This is what we're fighting to preserve. Alexandra stood carefully at the edge of the outcropping, her injured arm held close to her body, her gaze sweeping across the valley below. For several minutes she remained silent, absorbing the view. "It's beautiful," she finally acknowledged. "More than I expected." "Beauty isn't just what you see," Daniel replied. "It's what you feel. This valley isn't just scenery. It's a living system, human and natural elements in balance. Your development would disrupt that balance irreparably." Alexandra turned to face him, her expression troubled. "You've shown me impressive innovations and community spirit, Mr. Reeves, but you haven't addressed the fundamental problem. Pine Ridge Valley is running out of economic options. Without external investment, how long before more families leave? How long before your community center stands empty?" "That's a fair question," Daniel admitted, "and one we've been wrestling with for years, but Mountain Vista's current proposal isn't the answer." "Then what is?" Daniel gestured toward the setting sun. "We should head back. There's something at the farm I want to show you. Our alternative vision for Pine Ridge's future." The drive back to the farm was contemplative, both occupants absorbed in their thoughts. As twilight descended on the valley, Daniel's farmhouse emerged from the gathering darkness, warm light glowing from its windows. "Someone's there," Alexandra observed, tension entering her voice. "Community dinner night," Daniel explained. "Every Thursday after the farmer's market, whoever can make it brings food to share. Given recent events, I expect we'll have quite a crowd." Indeed, several vehicles were parked in the farmyard, and the sound of conversation drifted from the open kitchen door. Alexandra hesitated as Daniel parked the truck. "I'm not sure I'll be welcome," she said quietly. "Probably not by everyone," Daniel agreed. "But Pine Ridge values honesty and direct conversation. They deserve to hear from you directly, not through corporate representatives or legal documents." Inside, the farmhouse had transformed. The kitchen table overflowed with community dishes, homemade bread, roasted vegetables, preserved fruits, and mountain venison stew. A dozen valley residents filled the space, their conversations halting as Daniel entered with Alexandra. Margaret. Chen stepped forward, her expression stern but not hostile. "Daniel told us you'd be coming. We've agreed to listen." She gestured to the table. "But first we eat together. That's our way." The meal began awkwardly, with Alexandra seated between Daniel and Lily Chen, acutely aware of the curious and suspicious glances directed her way. Gradually, however, the natural rhythm of community dining took over. Stories were shared, children asked blunt questions that adults had been too polite to voice, and the conversation turned to the storm's impact on various parts of the valley. Alexandra spoke little, but listened intently. She noticed how problems were discussed collectively, with resources and labor offered without hesitation. When the Miller Farm's root cellar flooding was mentioned, 3 neighbors immediately volunteered to help with cleanup. When the school's solar panels were reported damaged, Lily offered technical expertise while others pledged materials. After the meal, as coffee and homemade apple pie were served, Thomas Bryant, the mayor Alexandra recognized from video conferences, arrived. His surprise at finding her seated at Daniel's table was poorly concealed. "Ms. Winters," he greeted, stiffly. "This is unexpected." "A happy accident, perhaps," Daniel suggested, setting a stack of documents on the cleared table. "Ms. Winters has seen our valley firsthand today. Now it's time she saw our counter-proposal." The documents Daniel spread across the table were comprehensive. Detailed plans for Pine Ridge Valley's sustainable development that preserved its agricultural heritage while creating new economic opportunities, solar farming on terrain too steep for crops, ecotourism that complemented rather than replaced traditional livelihoods, educational programs that would bring researchers and students to study the valley's unique environmental adaptations. "We call it the Living Heritage Initiative," Daniel explained, highlighting key sections. "Development that grows from what we are, rather than replacing it with something else." Alexandra studied the proposal with growing interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her business acumen. "This water conservation technology, you've patented it?" Lily nodded. 3 patents pending. We've been implementing it throughout the valley with considerable success. And these sustainable building designs? "My work," offered an older man at the end of the table. "Samuel Winters, retired architect. No relation, I assume." Alexandra smiled faintly. "None that I'm aware of." As the evening progressed, the true sophistication of Pine Ridge's alternative vision emerged. They weren't opposing development out of stubborn traditionalism. They were proposing a different model of progress, one that valued existing knowledge and community structures rather than discarding them. "The fundamental difference," Daniel summarized, "is that Mountain Vista's approach treats our valley as a resource to be acquired and repurposed. Our approach treats it as a living system to be nurtured and evolved." Mayor Bryant shifted uncomfortably. "The financial projections for Mountain Vista's proposal are significantly more favorable in the short term." "At what long-term cost?" Margaret challenged. "When the water rights are gone, when the natural systems are disrupted beyond repair, when our children have been transformed from land stewards to service workers, what then?" Alexandra remained silent, absorbing the passionate debate around her. The satellite phone chirped, interrupting the discussion. Daniel checked the message, his expression darkening. "Mountain Vista's board members have arrived in town," he announced. "They're calling for an emergency council meeting tomorrow morning to force the vote." All eyes turned to Alexandra, who straightened in her chair. "They don't know I'm here." "A convenient coincidence," Mayor Bryant observed skeptically. "No coincidence," Alexandra replied, meeting his gaze. I came to Pine Ridge deliberately, though not with corporate approval. The board has been concerned about my hesitation to proceed with the development as initially planned. Daniel leaned forward. What are you saying? Alexandra looked around the table at the faces of people whose lives would be irrevocably changed by her company's decisions. I'm saying that after what I've seen today, I have serious questions about our approach to Pine Ridge Valley. Questions my board may not appreciate. A ripple of surprised murmurs circulated through the room. Alexandra continued, her voice gaining strength despite her physical fatigue. Your Living Heritage initiative has elements that could be viable alternatives to our current proposal. With refinement, it could potentially serve both Mountain Vista's interests and preserve what makes this valley unique. You'd consider our counter-proposal? Daniel asked, skepticism evident in his tone. I'd consider a collaborative approach, Alexandra clarified. One that draws on both Mountain Vista's resources and Pine Ridge's existing innovations. Mayor Bryant scoffed. Your board won't even delay tomorrow's vote. Why would they consider a complete redirection? Alexandra's expression hardened with determination. Because I'm still CEO and I have information they need. As the community members debated the implications of this unexpected development, Daniel noticed Alexandra's growing pallor. The day's exertions had clearly taken a toll on her injured body. This discussion can continue tomorrow, he announced, standing. Ms. Winters needs rest, and we all have preparations to make for the council meeting. As the guests departed, some hopeful, others skeptical, all buzzing with the evening's revelations, Daniel and Alexandra found themselves alone in the kitchen once more. The remains of the community dinner had been cleared away, leaving only coffee mugs and the lingering scent of apple pie. "Did you mean what you said?" Daniel asked directly, "about collaborating rather than conquering?" Alexandra gazed out the window at the night sky, stars emerging in the clear mountain air. When I became CEO 3 years ago, Mountain Vista was primarily an eco-focused development company. Our mission was enhancing communities while preserving natural resources. She turned to face him. Somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. Profit margins became the priority. Sustainability became a marketing term rather than a guiding principle. And now? Now I've seen what real sustainability looks like. She gestured toward the document still spread across the table. Your community has created solutions my highly paid consultants haven't even considered. There's value here that goes beyond real estate and water rights. Daniel studied her face, looking for any sign of corporate manipulation. Finding none, he asked the question that had bothered him all day. Why did you really come to Pine Ridge? Alone. The truth this time. Alexandra's gaze didn't waver. Because my board presented me with an ultimatum. Either move forward with the development as planned, or step aside for someone who will. I needed to see for myself what we were destroying before making that decision. And what will you decide? She smiled faintly, the determined expression of a CEO replacing the vulnerability of an injured hiker. That depends on what happens tomorrow, Mr. Reeves. The game has changed for all of us. As night settled over Pine Ridge Valley, two unlikely allies contemplated the coming confrontation. A farmer fighting for his community's survival, and a corporate executive questioning the path that had brought her to power. Tomorrow's council meeting would determine not just the fate of the valley, but the future of Mountain Vista Corporation itself. Outside, A gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the soil that generations of Pine Ridge families had tended. Inside, seeds of a different kind had been planted, seeds of understanding that might yet grow into something neither Daniel nor Alexandra had imagined possible when the day began. Dawn broke over Pine Ridge Valley in a symphony of gold and a crimson as Daniel stood on his porch, watching the eastern sky with a steaming mug cradled in his hands. Sleep had eluded him most of the night, his mind churning with possibilities and dangers. Today's emergency council meeting would determine everything, not just for his community, but for the unexpected guests sleeping under his roof. The kitchen door creaked open behind him, and Alexandra stepped out, her hair damp from a recent shower, her injured arm held carefully in its cast. She'd borrowed more of Daniel's clothing, a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves and jeans, cinched with a belt, but somehow managed to look composed despite the circumstances. "You're up early," Daniel observed, offering her his mug of tea. She accepted, taking a small sip before returning it. "Corporate habit. The dawn hours are when I do my clearest thinking." Her gaze swept across the valley below, now visible in the growing light. "It's even more beautiful in the morning. It changes with every season, every weather pattern," Daniel replied. "That's something your surveys and satellite imagery can't capture, the living nature of this place." Alexandra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been considering our conversation last night. Your Living Heritage initiative has merit, but it needs refinement to attract serious corporate investment. We're not looking for corporate masters, Ms. Winters." "Alexandra," she corrected, "and I'm not suggesting masters. I'm suggesting partners. There's a significant difference." Daniel studied her face, searching for insincerity, but finding none. "You really believe you can convince your board to abandon their current approach? After all the money they've invested in surveys, bribes, and pressure tactics?" "Bribes is a serious accusation," Alexandra replied, her tone sharpening. "But you're not denying it." Daniel gestured toward the town visible in the distance. "Mayor Bryant's sudden acquisition of property in Silverton Heights, the county commissioner's children attending private universities they couldn't possibly afford. We may be isolated, but we're not blind." Alexandra's silence was answer enough. Finally, she sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "Mountain Vista's ethics have evolved since I became CEO. Not all changes have been in keeping with my original vision." "And what was that vision exactly?" She turned to face him, fully, her eyes clear in the morning light. "Sustainable development that enhances communities rather than erasing them. Growth that preserves what makes a place unique while creating new opportunities." She shook her head. "Somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. Quarterly profits became the priority over long-term sustainability. And now? Now I have a decision to make." Alexandra straightened, professional resolve replacing momentary vulnerability. "My satellite phone has 17 missed calls from board members. They're expecting me at the council meeting to finalize the vote." "And what will Alexandra Winters, CEO of Mountain Vista, tell them?" A slight smile curved her lips. "That depends on what happens in the next few hours. We should head to town. I need to see Dr. Chen before the meeting, and there's someone I want you to introduce me to." "Who?" Daniel asked, already retrieving his truck keys. "Lily Chen, your environmental engineer with the MIT degree. I have a proposition for her." The drive to town revealed Pine Ridge Valley awakening to a day most residents recognized as pivotal in their history. Cleanup crews cleared storm debris from roadways, while farmers assessed damage to fields and orchards. Despite the previous day's destruction, there was a resilience to their efforts, a community accustomed to rebuilding after nature's challenges. Dr. Chen's clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Pine Ridge's main street, its wraparound porch serving as a waiting area for patients. As Daniel parked, they noticed Eliza standing on the steps, clearly expecting them. "Right on time," she observed as they approached. "How's the head this morning, Miss Winters?" "Clearer," Alexandra replied, "though I suspect that has as much to do with yesterday's revelations as with my recovery." The examination was brief but thorough, Eliza checking Alexandra's neurological responses and examining the cast she'd applied the previous day. "The break is healing properly, but you should see a specialist when you return to the city. The concussion symptoms have improved, but I'd still advise against any strenuous activity for at least a week. I'm afraid today won't allow for much." "Rest," Alexandra responded, adjusting her sleeve over the cast. "Is your daughter at the community center this morning? I'd like to speak with her before the council meeting." Eliza's expression revealed her surprise. "Lily? She's at the water monitoring station. There's concern about contamination after the storm." Her eyes narrowed. "May I ask why Mountain Vista's CEO wants to speak with my daughter?" "Because she might hold the key to saving both our futures," Alexandra replied cryptically. "Daniel, can you take me there?" The water monitoring station was nestled alongside Pine Creek, the valley's primary waterway. A small, solar-powered structure housed sophisticated equipment that belied its rustic exterior. Lily Chen stood at a computer terminal, analyzing data, streams from various points throughout the watershed. She looked up as they entered, her expression hardening at the sight of Alexandra. "If you've come to collect more inaccurate data for your environmental impact statement, I'm a bit busy with actual science." Alexandra accepted the hostility without flinching. "Actually, I've come to offer you a job, Ms. Chen." Lily's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Excuse me?" "Your water conservation technology, the patents you mentioned yesterday. Mountain Vista has one of the largest sustainable technology divisions in the country. With proper funding and development, your innovations could be implemented far beyond Pine Ridge Valley." Daniel watched the exchange with growing interest as Lily's initial hostility gave way to cautious curiosity. "My technology stays with the community that helped develop it. I'm not interested in having it locked behind corporate patents and priced out of reach of the people who need it most." Alexandra nodded as if she'd expected this response. "What if those patents remained community-owned? What if Mountain Vista licensed the technology rather than acquiring it, with royalties flowing back to Pine Ridge?" "You're describing a completely different business model than what your company has proposed for our valley," Lily observed, her scientific mind quickly analyzing the implications. "I'm describing a partnership rather than an acquisition," Alexandra corrected, "one that might serve as a template for a revised approach to Pine Ridge as a whole." For the next hour, the three engaged in an intense discussion of possibilities. Lily's technological innovations became the centerpiece of a potential new arrangement, one where Mountain Vista would provide capital and distribution networks, while Pine Ridge maintained ownership and control of its core resources. "This is fascinating in theory," Daniel finally interjected, checking his watch. "But the council meeting starts in 30 minutes. Your board members will be there, expecting to finalize the original proposal." Alexandra's expression hardened with determination. Then it's time they met the real Pine Ridge Valley, not through surveys and reports, but face to face. She turned to Lily. "Bring your prototype and research data. The council should see exactly what they're voting on." The Pine Ridge community hall buzzed with tension as residents packed the modest building. Word had spread overnight about Alexandra's presence in the valley, and speculation ran rampant. At the front of the room, a table had been arranged for the 7 council members, with Mayor Bryant at the center, looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed designed to impress the corporate visitors. Those visitors, 3 Mountain Vista board members in expensive business attire, sat in reserved seats, their expressions revealing growing impatience. They consulted watches and phones repeatedly, clearly disturbed by their CEO's absence. When Daniel entered with Alexandra and Lily, a hush fell over the crowd, followed immediately by a wave of whispers. Alexandra's appearance, arm in a cast, dressed in borrowed clothes, accompanied by the community's most vocal corporate resistance leaders, was clearly not what anyone had expected. The most senior board member, a silver-haired man with a perpetual frown, rose immediately. "Alexandra, what happened? We've been trying to reach you for days." "Hello, Richard," she replied calmly. "I had an accident on the mountain during the storm. These people saved my life." "You should have contacted us immediately," he replied, his concern quickly giving way to annoyance. "The vote will proceed as scheduled," Alexandra interrupted, moving toward the council table. "But with important new information that has come to light during my unplanned visit to Pine Ridge Valley." Mayor Bryant cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Winters, we had understood you wouldn't be joining us today. The agenda needs adjustment," Alexandra stated firmly, her CEO authority evident despite her casual attire and injured state. "Before this council votes on Mountain Vista's proposal, they deserve to see the full picture, not just what our surveys have reported." The room grew silent as Alexandra took the floor, standing before the community whose future her company sought to transform. Despite her injuries and impromptu appearance, she commanded attention, a leader accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Yesterday, I experienced Pine Ridge Valley as few outsiders ever have," she began. "Not through data points or economic projections, but as a recipient of its most fundamental values: compassion, resourcefulness, and community strength. When I arrived injured on Daniel Reeves's doorstep, he didn't see a corporate adversary. He saw a person in need." Her gaze swept across the room, connecting with various residents she'd met the previous day. "What I discovered about Pine Ridge challenges everything in Mountain Vista's assessment reports. This isn't a dying community clinging to outdated practices. It's an innovative society that has developed sustainable solutions our company's highly paid consultants haven't even considered." Richard, the board chairman, stood abruptly. "Alexandra, if you're not feeling well after your accident, perhaps we should postpone—" "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Richard," she countered. "Lily, would you please share your presentation?" For the next 20 minutes, Lily Chen demonstrated the water conservation technology she developed specifically for mountain watershed management. Using comprehensive data collected over 5 years, she showed how Pine Ridge had actually increased water efficiency while neighboring valleys struggled with diminishing resources. "This technology alone," Alexandra explained, turning to her board members, could revolutionize Mountain Vista's approach to water management in all our developments. And it's just one of several innovations this community has created out of necessity. The board members exchanged concerned glances as Alexandra continued, systematically dismantling the narrative that had driven their development strategy. She highlighted the community's renewable energy solutions, sustainable agricultural practices, and resilient social structures, all resources that would be destroyed under Mountain Vista's current proposal. The Living Heritage Initiative, she concluded, holding up the document Daniel had shown her the previous evening, offers an alternative approach that preserves what makes Pine Ridge valuable while creating new economic opportunities for both the community and Mountain Vista. Richard's face had grown increasingly flushed during Alexandra's presentation. "This is highly irregular, Alexandra. The board approved a specific development strategy after months of planning. You can't simply arrive at the final vote and propose an entirely new direction." "Actually, Richard, as CEO, that's exactly what I can do," Alexandra replied, her voice level but firm. "Especially when our approved strategy is based on fundamentally flawed assumptions and incomplete data." "The financial projections," began another board member, a woman with a calculator-like precision to her movements, "are short-sighted." Alexandra interrupted. "They prioritize immediate returns over sustainable growth. The Living Heritage approach actually projects stronger long-term revenue with significantly reduced environmental remediation costs." Mayor Bryant, sensing the shifting dynamics, attempted to regain control of the meeting. "Perhaps we should proceed with the scheduled vote. I move to table the vote pending review of this new information," called out an elderly council member whom Daniel recognized as former schoolteacher Helen Martinez. "If Mountain Vista's own CEO is questioning their proposal, we would be irresponsible not to reconsider." The motion quickly gained a second, and despite the mayor's visible discomfort, parliamentary procedure required him to call for a show of hands. The vote to postpone was unanimous among council members, with only Bryant himself abstaining. As the formal meeting dissolved into animated discussion groups, Richard cornered Alexandra near the water cooler, his controlled corporate veneer barely masking his anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing? The board will not tolerate this kind of unilateral action." Alexandra met his gaze steadily. "The board hired me to make Mountain Vista an industry leader in sustainable development. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of what sustainability actually means. The Living Heritage approach realigns us with our stated corporate values. It realigns us with delayed profits and reduced shareholder returns," Richard countered. "Short-term thinking is what's destroying communities like Pine Ridge," Alexandra replied, "and destroying Mountain Vista's reputation in the process. How many lawsuits are we currently facing from previous development sites? How many millions in environmental remediation costs?" Before Richard could respond, Daniel approached with Lily and several other community leaders. "Ms. Winters, we've prepared a working session at the community center to begin integrating our initiative with Mountain Vista's resources and requirements. Would your board members be willing to participate?" Richard began to decline, but Alexandra cut him off smoothly. "They would be delighted. In fact, Richard's background in finance makes him particularly valuable for assessing the economic viability of community-owned patents." What followed was one of the most extraordinary days in Pine Ridge Valley's history. The community center, transformed into a collaborative workshop where corporate executives worked alongside farmers, engineers, and local craftspeople. Mountain Vista's marketing team, initially resistant to the changed direction, grew increasingly enthusiastic as they recognized the authentic story emerging, not of a corporate savior descending on a backward community, but of a genuine partnership between equals with complementary strengths. By mid-afternoon, Alexandra had established herself at the center of the collaboration, her corporate experience guiding the process while her newfound appreciation for Pine Ridge's values ensured the community's voice remained central. Daniel watched with growing admiration as she skillfully balanced competing interests, finding compromise where none had seemed possible. "You're good at this," he observed during a brief break as they stepped outside for fresh air. "Finding the middle path. It's what I was hired to do originally," she replied, gazing across the valley they'd toured the previous day, before quarterly reports and shareholder pressure pushed us toward more aggressive approaches. "And now? Your board doesn't seem entirely convinced." Alexandra smiled, a determined gleam in her eye. "Richard is calculating numbers as we speak. Once he realizes the reduced liability and sustainable revenue streams, his resistance will fade. Patricia is already intrigued by the marketing potential of a truly collaborative model. The others will follow. And if they don't," her expression hardened slightly, "then Mountain Vista will need a new CEO and I'll need a new venture partner for my next chapter." She turned to face him directly. "Your community has something priceless, Daniel, not just natural resources, but a vision of progress that doesn't require destruction of what came before. That's worth fighting for, even if it costs you your position." "Some principles are worth the risk," she replied simply, "something I think you understand better than most." As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the collaborative session produced its first tangible outcome, a framework agreement that would preserve Pine Ridge's agricultural character, while creating a joint venture focused on developing and marketing the community's technological innovations. Mountain Vista would provide capital and distribution networks. Pine Ridge would maintain control of its land and water resources. The corporate board members, initially skeptical, had gradually become engaged in the process. Richard's financial acumen had actually strengthened the economic projections, identifying tax advantages and grant opportunities the community hadn't considered. Patricia's marketing expertise had shaped a compelling narrative that would appeal to conscious consumers and investors alike. As the session concluded, Alexandra stood to address the assembled group, a blend of corporate representatives and community members who had begun the day as adversaries and ended it as tentative collaborators. "What we've created today isn't just a business agreement," she observed, her voice carrying through the community center. "It's a new model for development, one that honors the past while building toward the future, one that recognizes the value of community knowledge alongside corporate resources." Richard approached her as the meeting dispersed, his expression suggesting an internal struggle between corporate pragmatism and grudging respect. "This isn't what the board sent you to accomplish, Alexandra. No, it's something far better," she replied. "Something that will distinguish Mountain Vista from every other development company racing to exploit diminishing resources. Something sustainable in the truest sense of the word." The shareholders, will appreciate the reduced liability, costs, the positive publicity, and the long-term revenue streams from patented technologies, Alexandra finished for him. Not to mention avoiding the lawsuits that have plagued our previous developments. Present it properly, Richard, and they'll see this as visionary rather than conciliatory. As evening descended on Pine Ridge Valley, a spontaneous celebration emerged at Daniel's farm. Community members arrived with dishes and drinks, musicians unpacked instruments on the porch, and the warm glow of lanterns transformed the weathered farmhouse into a beacon visible across the valley. Alexandra, still wearing Daniel's borrowed clothes, found herself welcomed into conversations and activities that would have been unimaginable 24 hours earlier. Children approached without hesitation to ask about her caste. Elders shared stories of the valley's history. Young innovators like Lily discussed possibilities for expanding their work beyond Pine Ridge's boundaries. Daniel found her sitting on a wooden bench beneath his oldest apple tree, watching the community celebration with a contemplative expression. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, offering her a glass of homemade cider. She accepted the drink, sipping it appreciatively. "Not about the decision, just considering the path that brought me here." She gestured toward the gathering. "I've spent 10 years in corporate leadership, surrounded by people whose primary concern was extracting maximum value. One night in Pine Ridge has reminded me what genuine value actually looks like. It's not always visible on balance sheets," Daniel agreed, settling beside her. "But it should be," Alexandra replied with sudden intensity. "That's what sustainable development was supposed to measure. Not just financial returns, but community well-being, environmental health, cultural preservation. Somewhere along the way, the corporate world reduced sustainability to a marketing term." Daniel studied her profile in the lantern light, recognizing the conviction in her expression. "So what happens tomorrow when you return to that world?" "I bring this experience with me," she answered simply. "Mountain Vista has an opportunity to pioneer a truly different approach to development, one that partners with communities instead of consuming them. If the board embraces that vision, we move forward together. If not—" She shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement of her injured arm. "You'd really walk away from your position? Everything you've built?" Alexandra turned to face him, her expression resolute in the gentle light. "Some values aren't negotiable, Daniel. Your community has reminded me of that." She smiled, a hint of her corporate strategic thinking returning. "Besides, with Lily's patents and the other innovations we've documented today, there are plenty of venture capitalists who would fund an alternative approach. The world is hungry for authentic sustainability, not just greenwashed exploitation." The celebration continued around them, weaving together the seemingly disparate worlds of corporate strategy and community tradition. Mountain Vista Board. Members found themselves in conversations with farmers about soil regeneration techniques. Marketing executives exchanged ideas with local artisans about authentic storytelling. Engineers consulted with multi-generational agricultural families about water management practices, refined through decades of practical experience. As midnight approached, Eliza Chen joined Daniel and Alexandra beneath the apple tree, carrying a medical bag. "Time to check that head of yours, Ms. Winters. Corporate revolution is no excuse for neglecting concussion protocols." Alexandra submitted to the examination with good humor, answering Eliza's questions while the doctor checked her pupils and reflexes. "You've healed remarkably well," Eliza observed, packing away her equipment. though I suspect your board members might disagree about your cognitive function after today's reversal." Alexandra laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "They certainly questioned my judgment, but the numbers are winning them over. Richard hasn't looked up from his tablet in hours, recalculating projections based on today's framework." "And tomorrow?" Eliza asked, her tone serious, despite the festive atmosphere around them. "When you leave Pine Ridge and return to corporate headquarters, will today's vision survive the transition?" It was the question that hung unspoken in the night air. Would this unexpected collaboration endure beyond the immediate circumstances of Alexandra's accident and presence? Would corporate priorities reassert themselves once she returned to Mountain Vista's headquarters? Alexandra's answer came without hesitation, her voice carrying the authority that had elevated her to CEO. "This isn't a temporary diversion, Dr. Chen. It's a course correction. Mountain Vista began as a company committed to genuine sustainability. We lost our way pursuing quick returns and easy acquisitions. Pine Ridge has offered us an opportunity to rediscover our founding principles while pioneering a new approach to development." She stood, addressing not just Eliza, but the gathered community members who had fallen silent to listen. "What we've started today doesn't end when I leave this valley. It begins. The framework we've created, community ownership, corporate partnership, shared innovation, becomes the template for Mountain Vista's future endeavors." Richard approached, having overheard her declaration. "The board will require convincing." "Alexandra, this represents a significant strategic shift." "Then we'll convince them," she replied without hesitation. "With economic projections, reduced liability assessments, and sustainability metrics that actually measure what matters, Pine Ridge becomes our case study in truly sustainable development, a model that others will follow once they see the results." The community gathering continued late into the night, a blend of celebration and strategic planning. As residents gradually departed for their homes, Alexandra found herself walking with Daniel along the edge of his orchard. The valley spread beneath them in moonlight. 24 hours ago, I was fighting to keep you from buying this land out from under my community," Daniel observed. "Now we're planning a joint venture that could transform both our futures. Life takes unexpected turns. The best innovations often emerge from unexpected circumstances," Alexandra replied. "My accident forced me to see Pine Ridge through new eyes. Not as a development opportunity on a map, but as a living community with knowledge and values worth preserving." They stopped at the ridge point where they had stood the previous day, the valley now transformed by moonlight rather than sunset. Pine Ridge's scattered lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, each representing a home or business connected to the community's shared history. "Tomorrow will bring challenges," Daniel acknowledged. "Your board, our community members, not everyone will embrace this new direction immediately." Alexandra nodded, her expression thoughtful in the silver light. "True change never comes easily, but the alternative, continuing on paths that destroy communities like yours and corrupt companies like mine, that's not a future worth building." As they turned back toward the farmhouse, now quieted as the celebration wound down, Alexandra paused, looking up at Daniel with a mixture of gratitude and newfound purpose. "Thank you for taking in a stranger on a stormy night," she said simply. foreseeing beyond corporate titles to the person who needed help. That choice changed everything for both of us. Daniel smiled, the weight of months of resistance and worry lifting from his shoulders. In Pine Ridge, we have a saying passed down through generations. The hand extended in kindness shapes more futures than the fist clenched in power. Together, they walked back toward the farmhouse that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely alliance, a farmer fighting for his community's survival, and a corporate executive rediscovering her original mission. Behind them, the valley rested in moonlight, its future now heading toward a path neither could have imagined when the storm began. And as the night deepened toward dawn, stars wheeled overhead in ancient patterns, witnessing yet another turning point in Pine Ridge Valley's enduring story. A story now being written by hands working in concert rather than opposition, creating a future where prosperity and preservation no longer stood as adversaries, but as essential partners in genuine progress. 1 year later, the morning sun crested over Pine Ridge Valley, bathing the transformed landscape in golden light. Daniel Reeves stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying the changes that had unfolded since that fateful stormy night when an injured hiker collapsed at his doorstep. The farmhouse behind him had been carefully restored, its weathered siding replaced with locally harvested cedar while maintaining the original structure's character. Solar panels, new efficient models, gleamed on the southern roof slope, now part of a valley-wide renewable energy network that had reduced Pine Ridge's external power dependency by 80%. In the distance, where abandoned fields had once stood fallow, community agricultural projects now flourished. Terraced gardens followed the contours of the mountainside, demonstrating innovative water conservation techniques that had attracted agricultural researchers from 3 universities. The irrigation channels, rebuilt and enhanced with Lily Chen's monitoring technology, distributed the valley's precious water with unprecedented efficiency. Daniel sipped his coffee, real coffee, imported through Mountain Vista's fair trade. Networks, a small luxury that symbolized the valley's economic renaissance. The community was thriving not despite its traditional values, but because of them. The Living Heritage Initiative had transformed Pine Ridge Valley into a model that communities across the country were now studying and adapting. The rumble of an approaching vehicle drew his attention to the road. A sleek electric car navigated the improved mountain passage, no longer rutted and treacherous, but properly graded and maintained while preserving its natural character. Daniel smiled, recognizing the driver even at a distance. Alexandra Winters emerged from the car, her business attire a stark contrast to the borrowed clothes she'd worn during her first visit. The cast was long gone, though she occasionally massaged her left arm during cold weather, a lingering reminder of her fall on the mountain. She moved with the confident grace of a corporate executive, but her smile as she approached held the warmth of a true friend. "Right on time," Daniel observed, offering her a mug of coffee from the tray he'd prepared. "Some habits die hard," she replied, accepting the drink. "The board meeting ran late last night, but I wouldn't miss today's ceremony. 1-year anniversaries only come once." Together they stood in companionable silence, looking out over the valley that their unlikely partnership had transformed. The community center flags fluttered in the distance, colorful pennants announcing the day's celebration. People were already gathering, arriving from throughout the region, to witness what many publications had dubbed the Pine Ridge model in action. The governor's helicopter just landed at the new pad, Alexandra noted, checking her phone. And 3 more media crews have requested access. This little valley has captured quite a lot of attention. Too much, some might say, Daniel replied with a wry smile. Margaret threatened to chase reporters off her property with a rake if they trampled her heritage tomatoes again. Alexandra laughed, the sound free and genuine, so different from the controlled corporate chuckle she'd once employed. Some things never change. Speaking of which, how's the counter-proposal coming for the Silverdale project? We'll present it at the community dinner tonight. Lily and her team have adapted the watershed management system specifically for their coastal conditions. If Mountain Vista supports their implementation, Silverdale could avoid the water crisis they're projecting within 5 years. The mention of Mountain Vista no longer created tension between them. In the year since their partnership began, the company had undergone a transformation as remarkable as Pine Ridge Valley itself. Alexandra had emerged from her accident with a clear vision and the determination to implement it, challenging her board to embrace a truly sustainable development model that partnered with communities rather than consuming them. It hadn't been easy. 2 board members had resigned in protest during the initial transition. Shareholders had questioned the shift in strategy. But as the financial results began to materialize, reduced liability costs, premium pricing for truly sustainable developments, royalties from community-owned innovations, opposition had gradually transformed into cautious support. "We should head to town," Daniel suggested, noting the time. "People will be gathering at the community center for the opening remarks." They chose to walk rather than drive, following the path that wound through apple orchards now managed using regenerative agricultural techniques. The trees had responded with abundant harvests, their produce commanding premium prices through Mountain Vista's distribution channels. "I received the latest impact assessment this morning," Alexandra mentioned as they walked. "Pine Ridge's economic indicators have improved 60% since last year. More importantly, population decline has reversed. Young families are moving, drawn by affordable housing and meaningful work." Daniel nodded, unsurprised by the statistics that confirmed what he witnessed daily. The real measure isn't in the numbers, it's in the community's spirit. People believe in their future again. They're planning for generations ahead, not just surviving until the next season. That's what sustainable truly means, Alexandra. Agreed. The financial success is important, but it's the resilience that matters, the ability to weather economic and environmental challenges while preserving what gives a community its character. As they crested the final hill before town, Pine Ridge revealed itself in the morning light. The village had been revitalized without being reinvented. Historic buildings stood alongside carefully designed new structures that complemented rather than dominated the landscape. The community center, once in danger of becoming a heritage museum for tourists, bustled with activity as the heart of local governance and innovation. "They're waiting for you," Daniel observed as they approached the gathering. The visionary CEO who challenged corporate development paradigms. Alexandra shook her head slightly. "For us, this partnership succeeded because neither of us tried to dominate the other. Mountain Vista brought resources and networks. Pine Ridge brought knowledge and values. Together we created something neither could have achieved alone." The crowd that had gathered for the anniversary celebration represented this successful integration. Valley residents in practical work clothes stood alongside corporate representatives in business casual attire. University researchers mingled with local farmers, each learning from the other. Government officials, initially skeptical of the unorthodox development approach, now came to study its applications for other rural communities. Margaret Chen spotted them first, waving from the community center steps where she directed volunteer efforts with characteristic efficiency. There they are, our reluctant heroes. Come on, everyone's waiting to begin. The ceremony commenced with traditional Pine Ridge elements. A blessing from the valley's eldest resident, music from the community band, children presenting handcrafted gifts to honored guests. These traditions flowed seamlessly into modern additions, video presentations of the valley's transformation, demonstrations of innovative technologies, and speeches from officials who had supported the Living Heritage Initiative's expansion to other regions. Governor Elaine Woodward, who had championed the legislative changes needed to protect community-owned resources, addressed the gathering with evident admiration. What Pine Ridge and Mountain Vista have created here isn't just a successful business partnership or community development project. It's a new model for rural revitalization that honors the past while embracing the future. It demonstrates that progress doesn't require erasing traditional values. It can actually be enhanced by preserving them. Alexandra was called to speak. Next, stepping forward with the poised confidence that had made her one of the most respected CEOs in the country. Her corporate reputation, once tied to aggressive acquisition strategies, had been transformed through Pine Ridge's success story. Business publications that had initially criticized her risky pivot now featured her on their covers as a visionary leader redefining sustainable development. 1 year ago today, she began, Mountain Vista and Pine Ridge Valley formalized an unprecedented partnership. Not a corporate takeover, not a community surrender, but a genuine collaboration between equals with complementary strengths. She smiled, scanning the familiar faces. Many said it couldn't work. Corporations exist to maximize profits. Communities exist to preserve their way of life. These goals were considered fundamentally incompatible. She gestured toward the valley spreading around them. Pine Ridge has proven otherwise. By recognizing the value in what already existed, here, traditional knowledge, sustainable practices, community resilience, Mountain Vista gained resources more valuable than any property acquisition. By accepting corporate partnership without surrendering their autonomy, Pine Ridge gained the capital and networks needed to thrive in a changing economy. Alexandra continued, outlining the tangible achievements of the past year. Economic revitalization without environmental degradation, population growth without cultural erosion, technological advancement without abandoning traditional wisdom. But it was her conclusion that captured the true significance of what had been accomplished. The most important outcome isn't measured in profit margins or economic indicators, she stated, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd. It's the creation of a template that challenges fundamental assumptions about progress. Pine Ridge demonstrates that communities don't have to choose between economic viability and cultural preservation. Companies don't have to choose between shareholder value and ethical development. When we approach each other as partners rather than adversaries, We discover solutions that serve both purposes. Daniel was called forward next, the reluctant public speaker who had become an articulate advocate for rural communities nationwide. His practical knowledge and unwavering commitment to Pine Ridge's values had earned him respect far beyond the valley's boundaries. 6 governors had consulted him on rural development strategies. 2 congressional committees had invited his testimony on sustainable agriculture policy. A year ago, Pine Ridge Valley stood at a crossroads. He began, his deep voice carrying naturally without amplification. Our community was diminishing, young people leaving, resources dwindling, hope fading. The conventional wisdom said our choices were simple: surrender to corporate development or continue our slow decline into irrelevance. He smiled, looking toward Alexandra. Then a storm brought an unexpected visitor to my doorstep, and everything changed. Not because Mountain Vista suddenly became benevolent, or because Pine Ridge surrendered its principles. Everything changed because both sides recognized that listening to each other, truly listening, revealed possibilities neither had considered alone. Daniel highlighted the practical implementations that had flowed from this recognition, the community-owned patent structure that protected local innovations while allowing their broader application, the educational initiatives that combined traditional knowledge with modern techniques, the environmental preservation measures that actually enhanced economic productivity rather than restricting it. The storm that brought Alexandra Winters to Pine Ridge wasn't just a weather event, he concluded. It was a perfect metaphor for what happens when different worlds collide. There can be damage, certainly, but after the storm clears, there's also opportunity for new growth, new understanding, and new directions, if we have the courage to see them. And as formal presentations concluded, the celebration transitioned into a community festival. Food stalls offering local specialties lined the village green. Artisans demonstrated traditional crafts alongside modern adaptations. Children led tours of the school's sustainable agriculture projects, proudly explaining innovations they had helped implement. Alexandra and Daniel found themselves momentarily alone by the creek that ran through the center of town, its banks now beautifully landscaped, with native plants that prevented erosion while providing habitat for pollinators. "Did you ever imagine this outcome?" Alexandra asked, "when you found me bleeding on your porch that night?" Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "I was more concerned with stopping the bleeding than contemplating community transformation. Though I do remember thinking you didn't look like a typical hiker. And I remember thinking you didn't look like a typical corporate adversary," she countered with a smile. "Too compassionate by half. That compassion nearly gave me a heart attack when I realized who you were." "Best mistake I ever made," Alexandra mused, looking out over the bustling celebration. "Coming here alone, trying to understand what my company was about to destroy." "Was it really a mistake?" Daniel asked, "or some part of you already questioning the path Mountain Vista was taking?" Before she could answer, they were joined by Lily Chen, now director of Mountain Vista's Sustainable Technology Division, while maintaining her residence and research base in Pine Ridge. Her innovations had expanded far beyond water conservation, creating integrated systems that communities worldwide were implementing. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, tablet in hand, "but we've got representatives from 3 more valleys requesting partnership evaluations. The Cedar Ridge community is particularly promising. They've developed forestry management techniques that could revolutionize our approach to timber resources." Alexandra nodded. immediately shifting into her executive role. Schedule initial consultations. Make sure our assessment teams include both technical and cultural specialists. We need to understand their values before evaluating their resources. Daniel watched this exchange with quiet pride. The transformation in both women over the past year reflected the larger changes their partnership had catalyzed. Alexandra had rediscovered her original mission, evolving from corporate acquirer to collaborative innovator. Lily had expanded her technical brilliance into organizational leadership, proving that scientific genius and human understanding could coexist in the same person. As afternoon progressed into evening, the celebration continued with a community dinner that had become one of Pine Ridge's most cherished traditions. Long tables stretched across the village green, laden with dishes that represented both heritage recipes and innovative cuisine. Valley residents and visitors broke bread together, the barriers between locals and outsiders dissolving in shared appreciation for good food and meaningful conversation. Mayor Helen Martinez, who had replaced Thomas Bryant after his suspicious real estate dealings came to light, stood to propose a toast to partnerships that preserve rather than destroy, to progress that honors tradition, to Pine Ridge and Mountain Vista, showing us all a better way forward. Glasses raised throughout. The gathering, crystal and mason jars alike, catching the golden light of the setting sun. The moment crystallized everything the past year had achieved, not just economic revival or environmental protection, but a fundamental reimagining of how different worlds could interconnect. As twilight deepened into evening, lanterns illuminated the village green, and musicians gathered for the traditional anniversary dance. Alexandra, who had arrived in a business suit, now wore a borrowed casual dress more suited to celebration. Daniel, having exchanged his work clothes for a clean shirt and jeans, found himself pulled into conversations with visitors eager to understand Pine Ridge's transformation. The secret ingredient isn't technological or financial, he explained, to a group of officials from a neighboring state. It's respect. Mountain Vista approached us as a community with valuable knowledge, not just as property to be acquired. We approached them as potential partners, not just corporate raiders to be resisted. That fundamental shift in perspective made everything else possible. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Daniel and Alexandra took a moment to climb the small hill overlooking the village green. From this vantage point, the entire valley was visible. The revitalized town center with its warm lights, the agricultural projects extending up the mountainsides, the research facilities nestled respectfully into the landscape, and beyond them all, the eternal mountains that had witnessed generations of human struggle and adaptation. Sometimes I still can't believe how it all unfolded, Alexandra admitted. The honest vulnerability she rarely showed in corporate settings emerging in the privacy of friendship. One misstep on a mountain trail changed everything. For me, for Mountain Vista, for Pine Ridge. Was it really just a misstep? Daniel asked quietly. Or was some part of you already searching for a different path? Alexandra considered this, watching the celebration below. I was questioning our direction before I came to Pine Ridge, she finally acknowledged. The board was pushing for faster acquisitions, more aggressive development. Communities were resisting, filing lawsuits, generating negative publicity. Our sustainability commitments had become marketing tools rather than guiding principles. So you came to see for yourself, I came to understand what we were destroying, she corrected, to witness firsthand what our surveys and impact statements couldn't capture. I never expected to find innovations we could learn from or values that would realign my own. Daniel nodded, understanding the complex journey that had brought them both to this moment. And now, with Pine Ridge established as a successful model, what's next for the visionary CEO? Alexandra smiled, her expression combining corporate determination with newly discovered wisdom. Expansion, but not in the traditional sense. We're identifying other communities with unique knowledge and practices worth preserving, offering partnership rather than acquisition, creating a network of living heritage developments that each maintain their distinctive character while sharing resources and innovations. The anti-corporate strategy, Daniel observed with a hint of irony. The truly sustainable strategy, Alexandra corrected. Mountain Vista's stock value has increased 42% since we implemented the Pine Ridge model. Our liability costs have decreased by 60%. Employee satisfaction and retention have reached record levels. It turns out that doing the right thing can also be the profitable thing when you take a long enough view. As night settled over Pine Ridge Valley, the celebration continued with a significance that extended far beyond a single community's revival. What had begun with a simple act of compassion, a farmer helping an injured stranger, had catalyzed changes that were reshaping approaches to development across the country. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the valley washed clean by gentle overnight rain. Daniel found Alexandra at the eastern edge of his orchard, watching the sunrise with a contemplative expression. Early riser as always, he observed, joining her with fresh coffee. Old habits, she replied, accepting the offered mug, though these days I'm watching sunrises by choice rather than corporate necessity. She gestured toward the valley below. I wanted one more look before heading back. Board meetings and quarterly reviews seem so artificial after being here. You could stay longer, Daniel suggested. The Mountain Vista team won't collapse without you for another day. Alexandra smiled, shaking her head. They might not, but there are 3 community partnership evaluations waiting for my review, and the Silverdale proposal needs finalization before next week's presentation. The work continues. They walked together through the orchard, apple trees heavy with ripening fruit stretching in ordered rows down the mountainside. These trees, once struggling from drought and neglect, now demonstrated the integrated growing techniques that combined traditional knowledge with modern science. University agricultural programs sent students to study these methods. Government agencies documented their water efficiency. I received an interesting proposal yesterday, Daniel mentioned as they walked. The National Rural Development Commission wants Pine Ridge to become a formal training center. Communities facing similar challenges would send representatives here to learn our integrated approach. You'd be an excellent teacher, Alexandra observed. Few people understand both the practical and philosophical aspects of sustainable development as well as you do. Daniel looked thoughtful, considering possibilities that wouldn't have existed a year earlier. It would mean spending less time in the orchard, more time sharing what we've learned. The greatest innovations deserve the widest application, she replied. What Pine Ridge has created shouldn't remain isolated in one valley, no matter how beautiful. Disney, as they reached Daniel's truck, prepared for the drive to the regional airport where Alexandra's corporate jet waited, they paused for a final look at the transformed landscape. Solar arrays gleamed alongside traditional structures. Modern technology supported ancient agricultural wisdom. The community that had nearly faded into economic irrelevance now vibrated with purposeful activity. One stormy night, one injured hiker, one farmer's decision to help rather than turn away, Alexandra mused, such small moments that change everything. The truest changes often begin that way, Daniel replied. Not with grand strategies or corporate initiatives, but with individual choices to see others as they truly are, to listen to what's being said, to help when help is needed. As they drove through the valley toward the airport, they passed tangible evidence of their partnership's success. The expanded community center hosting educational programs, the technological incubator where Lily Chen mentored young innovators, the restored wetlands that both protected water quality and attracted ecotourism. Each project represented the balanced integration of economic viability and community values that had become Pine Ridge's hallmark. At the airport, where Alexandra's corporate responsibilities awaited, they paused for a final moment before she boarded the jet that would return her to Mountain Vista's headquarters. No longer strangers, not quite business partners. Something more complex and valuable than either. They had forged a connection that continued to transform both their worlds. "Until the next storm brings you to my doorstep," Daniel said with a smile, extending his hand. Alexandra ignored the offered handshake, instead embracing him briefly. "Next time, I'll skip the broken arm and head injury, but I'll bring those investment projections for the educational center expansion." As her jet lifted away from Pine Ridge Valley, Alexandra watched the landscape recede below, the community that had changed her corporate philosophy, her professional trajectory, and her personal understanding of true value. In her briefcase sat the presentation she would deliver to Mountain Vista's board the following day, outlining the next phase of their transformed development strategy. The document's title page read simply, "The Living Heritage Network, Expanding the Pine Ridge Model." Its contents detailed not a corporate expansion plan, but a partnership framework that would preserve local knowledge while creating sustainable economic opportunity. Not extraction of resources, but exchange of wisdom. Not standardization, but celebration of distinctive character. Daniel watched the jet disappear into the blue mountain sky before turning his truck back toward the valley. The orchard needed attention. The irrigation systems required maintenance, and community members would be gathering to discuss the training center proposal. The work of balancing tradition and innovation, preservation and progress continued daily, not as opposing forces, but as essential partners in creating a future worth inhabiting. As he drove the familiar mountain road, Daniel reflected on the extraordinary year that had unfolded from one simple choice on a stormy night. Opening his door to a stranger in need had initiated changes far beyond anything he could have imagined, not just for Pine Ridge Valley, but for communities across the country now following their model. The true power of their story, he realized, lay not in dramatic confrontation or corporate conquest, but in the recognition that lasting change emerges from genuine connection. Alexandra had come to his farm, seeking understanding of what her company would transform. She had departed, transformed herself, carrying new vision back to corporate boardrooms where such perspective rarely penetrated. Pine Ridge Valley spread before him as he descended the mountain road, no longer struggling against extinction, but flourishing through adaptation. The community had preserved its core identity while embracing necessary evolution. Mountain Vista had maintained its business success while rediscovering its founding principles. Together, they had created a third path where conventional wisdom insisted none existed. And it had all begun with the simplest of human responses: compassion for a stranger in distress, an injured hiker appearing on a stormy night, and one farmer's decision to help rather than turn away. In that moment of basic human kindness, worlds that seemed irreconcilable had found their first connection, their first possibility of understanding, their first step toward partnership rather than opposition. As Daniel returned to his revitalized farm, the evening sun gilded the mountain peaks in the same amber light that had illuminated Alexandra's arrival 1 year earlier. The cycle had completed itself, yet the story continued unfolding, not just in Pine Ridge Valley, but in every community where people dared to imagine a future built through collaboration rather than conquest, through respect rather than exploitation, through partnership rather than dominance. The legacy of that stormy night had become something far greater than either Daniel or Alexandra had imagined possible. A living demonstration that compassion creates possibilities that calculation alone could never discover. In helping an injured stranger, Daniel had not only saved Alexandra, but had initiated a transformation that continued to expand beyond their valley, beyond their partnership, beyond their individual lives. A ripple effect of positive change, born from one simple human choice to extend a hand when it was needed most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.